Have you ever stood behind a door and heard someone you love tear you apart with one sentence? I was there, holding a glass of milk for my son, my slippers hushed on the hardwood, when my mother-in-law whispered to him, "Your mom just leeches off us." I froze, not from fear, but from heartbreak that rooted me in place. What do you do when poison is whispered to your child? If you've ever been humiliated in your own home by someone who thinks you're too kind to push back, I really want to know. Where are you listening from? And what city are you in? Because right then, I knew silence wasn't an option anymore. Hi everyone, I'm Sarah, living in a cozy ranch house in Columbus, Ohio, where summer evenings buzz with fireflies and winter mornings hush the world in frost. I'm a stay-at-home mum, a title that barely captures the rhythm of my days, kneading dough for dinner, bandaging my son's scrapes, keeping our home a haven amid the chaos of family. Before motherhood, I was a graphic designer, my nights alive with sketches for local shops' logos, my desk a mess of coloured pencils and dreams. But when Ethan, my 7-year-old, came along, I traded that for him. His giggles, his curious questions, the way he clings to me after a bad dream. My husband, Tom, a high school math teacher with warm eyes and a laugh that still catches me off guard, cheered me on. We carved out this life in a home where the scent of my apple pies lingers and Ethan's finger paintings brighten the walls, a testament to the love we've stitched together. 3 years ago, when Tom's mother, Evelyn, lost her husband and her health began to waver, I opened our home to her. I imagined knitting circles, her sharing tales of Tom's childhood over coffee. With her soft grey curls and gentle smile, she seems like the perfect grandma, always slipping Ethan homemade cookies or reading him bedtime stories. To our neighbours, she's a saint. But I know another side, one that hides behind her kind eyes, a tongue that cuts like a knife when she thinks I can't hear. I've caught her murmurs about my sloppy housekeeping, how I coddle Ethan, always delivered in that sugary tone that makes you question what you heard. I poured myself into making her feel at home. I'd rise early to brew her favourite chamomile tea, scrub the floors until they gleamed, cook pot roasts that filled the house with warmth, all in hopes of winning her over. I'd sit with her after dinner, asking about her old neighbourhood, even when her replies were sharp or dismissive. I wanted us to be family, not just roommates, but no matter how hard I tried, her words slithered out to Tom, to her friends at church, painting me as lazy, inadequate. "Sarah lets this place fall apart," she'd sigh, or, "She's got no backbone with that boy." Tom sees it and bless his heart, he tries to hold us together. He's my rock, the man who still leaves me love notes in the lunch I pack him. At night, in the quiet of our bedroom, he'll pull me close, his breath warm against my hair. "You're incredible, Sarah," he'll whisper. "Don't let her get to you." Sometimes he stands up for me. Over breakfast, he'll grin and say, "Mom, Sarah's biscuits are better than yours ever were." But Evelyn just scoffs, her lips a tight line, and shifts the conversation. I once overheard him on the porch, voice low but firm. "Mum, stop picking at her. She's doing everything." Her reply was ice. "You're blind, Tom. She's got you fooled." Tom's trapped, caught between his mother's iron will and the wife he loves. I see the toll it takes, the way he clenches his jaw when Evelyn snaps, the tired lines around his eyes. He fights for me in his quiet way, but her prejudice is a wall he can't break. And each day, as I scrub dishes or tuck Ethan in, I feel her judgment chipping away at the home I've poured my soul into, threatening to unravel the family I've fought so hard to keep whole. Living with Evelyn's sharp tongue was like walking through a field of thorns. Every step drew blood, but I kept going, hoping the path would clear. After years of her veiled barbs, I thought I'd grown thick skin. But as time passed, her words turned crueler, her criticisms more relentless, chipping away at the fragile peace I'd tried to maintain in our Columbus home. What started as muttered complaints became a campaign to undermine me, not just in private, but in front of my son, Ethan, the one person I'd shield from any storm. It began with small things. I'd spend hours cooking, chopping onions until my eyes stung, simmering chili to fill the house with warmth. And Evelyn would poke at her plate, lips pursed. "Too salty," she'd say, or, "You call this a meal?" I'd bite my tongue, forcing a smile, but each jab landed like a pebble in a growing pile. She'd hover as I cleaned, pointing out a smudge on the counter or a sock left on the couch. "This house is a mess, Sarah," she'd sigh, as if I hadn't been scrubbing all morning. Once, she dragged up a story from years ago when I'd forgotten to mail a bill during a week Ethan had the flu. "Always scatterbrained," she told Tom over coffee, twisting the truth to paint me as careless. I stood in the hallway, unseen, my cheeks burning, but I stayed silent, thinking I could outlast her. Then she turned her venom on Ethan. One afternoon, I was in the laundry room folding his tiny jeans when I heard her voice from the living room, low and deliberate. "Your mum's lazy, Ethan, just sits around leeching off us." My heart stopped. I crept closer, peering through the cracked door. Ethan, sitting cross-legged with his toy trucks, looked up, his brow furrowed. "That's not true," he said, his small voice fierce. "Mum does everything. She's good to Dad, to me." My chest swelled with pride, but Evelyn just chuckled, patting his head like he was a naive puppy. "You'll understand when you're older, sweetie." Something snapped inside me. I pushed the door open, my hands trembling but my voice steady. "You're right, Evelyn. He will understand one day." Her eyes widened, caught off guard, her usual smirk faltering. Ethan turned to me, his face bright with relief. But Evelyn recovered quickly, her lips thinning. "Just talking, Sarah," she said, waving a hand. "No need to make a scene." But I held her gaze, my heart pounding. For the first time, I didn't swallow my words. "He'll understand who really keeps this family together," I said, then took Ethan's hand and led him to the kitchen, away from her poison. That moment shifted something in me. I'd spent years absorbing her slights, convincing myself it was my job to keep the peace. But hearing her try to turn my son against me lit a fire I couldn't douse. I started noticing her tactics more clearly, how she'd interrupt my stories at dinner with a sarcastic hum, or tell Ethan I'd bought his favorite cookies instead of baking them, as if I couldn't manage a simple recipe. Each time, I felt the weight of her disdain, but also a growing resolve. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for the truth Ethan would carry as he grew. I couldn't let her rewrite who I was in his eyes. Still, the house felt smaller, the air thicker with unspoken battles. Tom saw it too, his jaw tight when Evelyn's comments cut too deep, but his attempts to intervene, quiet pleas to give Sarah a break, were met with her dismissive shrugs. I loved him for trying, but I knew this was my fight now. The thorns were sharper, the path narrower, but I wasn't turning back. Standing up to Evelyn that day, with Ethan's hand in mine, felt like a spark in the dark. A fleeting burst of courage that lit up the truth I'd been hiding from. But the fire didn't catch. Her venom didn't slow. If anything, it grew sharper, more deliberate, as if my defiance had stoked her resentment. Our Columbus home, once a sanctuary, now felt like a battlefield, with every dinner, every conversation, a chance for her to remind me I'd never be enough. Tom, my anchor through it all, saw the toll it took. He tried to shield me in his gentle, steady way, but Evelyn's iron will bent for no one, not even her son. Tom's efforts started small, subtle enough that I almost missed them at first. One evening, after Evelyn snapped that my roasted chicken was dry as cardboard, I caught him lingering in the kitchen as I washed dishes. The faucet hummed, steam rising, and he leaned close, his voice low. "That chicken was perfect, Sarah. Don't let her get to you." His hand grazed my shoulder, a quiet promise. I nodded, my throat tight, grateful for the warmth of his words, in a house that felt colder by the day. But Evelyn's barbs kept coming. My vacuuming was half-hearted, my garden a weed patch. Each critique was a pebble, piling up until I could barely breathe under their weight. Then came the phone call. I was folding laundry in the bedroom, the scent of fresh linens grounding me, when I heard Tom's voice from the porch, taut with frustration. "Mom, you've got to stop being so hard on Sarah," he said, his words clipped. "She's doing everything for this family." I paused, a towel half folded, straining to hear. Evelyn's reply crackled through the line, sharp and unyielding. "You've gone soft, Tom. She's got you wrapped around her finger." My stomach twisted. I wanted to rush out to tell him he didn't have to fight this alone, but I stayed still, knowing his battle was as much with his loyalty to her as with her cruelty to me. When he came inside, his jaw was set, his eyes clouded with defeat. He didn't mention the call, but he squeezed my hand as he passed, a silent apology. Dinners became the worst. I'd pour my heart into every meal, kneading dough for biscuits, stirring gravy until it thickened just right, hoping to carve out a moment of peace. Tom tried to lift the mood, his voice bright with effort. "Sarah, this stew is incredible," he'd say, smiling across the table. "You've outdone yourself." I'd blush, clinging to his praise like a lifeline. But Evelyn would cut in, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Her? Cook like that? You're blind, Tom." The words landed like a slap, silencing the table. Ethan would glance between us, his fork hovering, sensing the tension but too young to name it. I'd force a smile, pass the peas, anything to keep the moment from unraveling. Tom's eyes would darken, his knuckles whitening around his glass, but he'd say nothing, caught in the impossible bind of son and husband. It wasn't that Tom didn't care. He did, fiercely. Late at night, when the house was still, he'd hold me close, his breath steady against my hair. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he'd whisper. "I don't know how to fix this." I'd trace the lines of his face, seeing the weight he carried, and tell him it was okay, even when it wasn't. His love was my strength, but it couldn't dull the edge of Evelyn's disdain. She dismissed my every effort, my sewing, my parenting, even the way I laughed, as if I were a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. Once, she told Ethan my homemade lemonade was store-bought, probably. Right as I set the pitcher down. Tom's jaw twitched, but he stayed quiet, his silence a wound we both felt. Each day I woke determined to rise above her. I'd hum as I dusted, kiss Ethan's forehead before school, hold Tom's hand under the table. But Evelyn's unrelenting scorn was a shadow I couldn't outrun. I was fighting to keep my place in my own home, and though Tom stood by me, his quiet defenses weren't enough to move her. The battle was mine, and I was learning, slowly, that surviving it meant finding a strength I'd never known I had. The weight of Evelyn's words had become a constant hum, like static I could never quite tune out. But I kept going, pouring love into our Columbus home, believing that my efforts, my cooking, my care for Ethan, my quiet endurance would hold us together. Tom's support, though often silent, was my anchor, even when his mother's scorn drowned out his efforts. I thought I'd seen the worst of her cruelty, that I'd built walls high enough to withstand her. But nothing could have prepared me for the moment that stripped me bare, right in front of my son, on the day that was meant to be his joy. It was Ethan's 8th birthday, a Saturday alive with the buzz of celebration. I'd been up since dawn, the kitchen a whirlwind of flour and sugar as I baked his favourite chocolate cake from scratch. The recipe was my mother's, one I'd perfected over years, rich, moist, with a frosting so smooth it gleamed. I'd spent hours on it, my hands steady despite the ache in my back, wanting every bite to feel like love for my boy. The house was decked out, balloons bobbing in the living room, streamers curling along the banister, and Ethan's laughter echoing as he played with his cousins. I wore my best smile, determined to make this day perfect, a memory he'd carry forever. As evening settled, we gathered around the dining table, the glow of candles casting soft shadows. Ethan stood at the center, his eyes wide with delight, his party hat slightly askew. Tom was beside me, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder, a quiet reassurance. Evelyn sat across from us, her face pleasant but her eyes sharp, watching. I lifted the cake, the air thick with the scent of chocolate, and set it before Ethan. The room erupted in cheers, and I felt a flicker of pride. Maybe, just for today, we could be a family without her shadow. Then Evelyn spoke, her voice cutting through the warmth like a winter gust. "Who'd believe Sarah made this cake?" she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Probably ordered it and took the credit." Laughter rippled, her sister's chuckle a cousin's snort, before the room fell silent. Ethan froze, his smile fading. My heart plummeted, heat flooding my face. I stood there, holding the candle box, my hands trembling as her words hung in the air. She'd chosen this moment, Ethan's moment, to tear me down. I glanced at Tom, his jaw tightened, his eyes locking on his mother. I saw the words forming. He opened his mouth, ready to defend me, but then his gaze dropped and he said nothing. The silence was louder than any shout, a betrayal that stung deeper than Evelyn's barb. I wanted to scream, to tell her I'd spent hours mixing batter, scraping bowls, all for my son, but the eyes on me, Ethan's, the relatives, hers, pinned me in place. I couldn't let this unravel his day. So I moved, slow and deliberate. I opened the candle box, my fingers steady despite the storm inside. I placed each candle on the cake, one by one, their tiny flames flickering in the dim light. "Make a wish, Ethan," I said softly, my voice a lifeline to him. He looked at me, his eyes searching, then blew out the candles, the room clapping as if nothing had happened. I cut the first slice, handed it to him, and smiled, pouring every ounce of love into that moment. Evelyn watched, her lips a thin line. But I didn't meet her gaze. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. Inside, I was breaking. Her words weren't just about the cake. They were about me, my worth, my place in this family. To say them in front of Ethan, to plant that seed of doubt in his heart, was a cruelty I hadn't imagined, even from her. Tom's silence cut deeper, a reminder that his love, though real, couldn't always protect me. I wanted to run, to hide from the weight of their judgment. But as I watched Ethan lick frosting off his fingers, giggling with his cousins, I knew I couldn't. This was his home, his family, and I was his mother. I'd stay, not because I was weak, but because my love for him was stronger than her hate. That night, as I tucked Ethan into bed, he hugged me tight. "Thanks for the cake, Mum. It was the best." His words were a balm, stitching me back together. I kissed his forehead, my resolve hardening. I wouldn't fight Evelyn with shouts or tears. I'd fight by being the mother Ethan deserved, the wife Tom still loved, even if he faltered. The battle wasn't over, but I was ready to face it, one quiet, steady step at a time. Ethan's birthday left a scar, one I felt every time I passed the dining room table, its polished surface a silent witness to Evelyn's cruelty and Tom's faltering silence. That night, as I lay in bed, the weight of it all pressed against me. Her words, the laughter, the way my son's eyes searched mine for reassurance. I could have walked away, packed a bag, and left the Columbus house that no longer felt like mine. But as I listened to Tom's steady breathing beside me, his hand resting lightly on mine, even in sleep, I knew I wouldn't. I stayed, not out of weakness, but for the love that still tethered me to Ethan and the man who, despite his flaws, was my home. The days that followed were a quiet reckoning. I woke each morning with a new resolve, not to fight Evelyn with sharp words or tearful pleas, but to carve out my place through actions that spoke louder than her disdain. I started small, reclaiming the rhythms of our life. I'd rise early, the kitchen filling with the scent of brewing coffee and pancakes sizzling on the griddle. I'd braid Ethan's shoelaces into neat knots before school, whispering, "You're my hero," as he grinned. I'd tend my garden, coaxing roses to bloom despite the autumn chill, their petals a reminder that beauty could thrive in hard ground. Each task was a declaration. I was here and I was enough. Evelyn didn't stop. Her barbs still flew. My laundry was sloppy, my stories boring, but they hit differently now. I'd meet her eyes, offer a calm nod, and move on, refusing to let her venom take root. I wasn't the Sarah who'd once shrunk under her gaze, apologizing for imagined faults. I was learning to stand taller, to let her words glance off me like rain on a window pane. Ethan noticed it too. One evening, as we baked cookies together, he hugged me, his small arms fierce. "You're the best, Mom," he said, and I held him close, knowing those words were worth more than Evelyn's approval ever could. Tom saw the change too. One night, after Evelyn had scoffed at my attempt to redecorate the living room, he followed me to the porch. The air was crisp, the stars sharp above our quiet street. "I should have said something," he murmured, his voice heavy with regret. "I hate how she treats you." I looked at him, the man who'd held my hand through labor pains and late night fears, and saw the struggle in his eyes. "I know," I said softly, "but I need you to stand with me, Tom. Really stand." He nodded, pulling me into his arms, and for the first time in months, I felt we were on the same side. He wasn't perfect, but he was trying, and that was enough to keep me here. I thought about leaving, about a life free of Evelyn's shadow, but every time the thought crept in, I'd see Ethan smile or feel Tom's hand in mine, grounding me through nightmares where I was forgotten. They were my reason, my strength. I stayed for them, but also for the woman I was becoming, one who fought not with shouts, but with unwavering love. I'd sit with Ethan at homework time, laughing over math problems, or slip love notes into Tom's lunch, reminding him I was still his. These were my weapons, quiet but fierce, building a legacy Evelyn couldn't touch. As I stood in the kitchen one evening, kneading dough for Sunday dinner, I realized I wasn't the wife who'd once begged for acceptance. I was Sarah, the mother Ethan would grow up admiring. The one who'd say, "My mum was there, even when no one stood with her." I chose to stay, not because I couldn't leave, but because this home, this family, was worth fighting for. My love didn't roar. It glowed, steady and unyielding, lighting the way forward. I was still here, and I was whole.